Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
It never ends, does it? Every single time one of the claims falls apart under scrutiny, the same people come back with new claims that will eventually fall apart. I suppose most obviously Andrew Neil's interview with Boris Johnson on Friday about Article 24 of GATT, the General Agreement on Trade and Tariffs, and the moment where Andrew Neil pushed him to answer a very simple question: have you read paragraph C? How many times have I sat here and told you precisely which bits of that agreement you needed to read in order to understand why people like Rees-Mogg were inflating balloons of utter bilge? Paragraph B being the most crucial part, but paragraph C making it absolutely clear that if you are genuinely talking about taking back control and leaning towards WTO terms as some sort of promised land, then you need to be aware that the European Union gets to decide precisely what we can do. And only after free trade agreement negotiations are firmly established, which they won't be until the withdrawal agreement has been agreed. Well, it has been agreed by 27 EU countries, just us that couldn't get it through Parliament. And I'm not suggesting that I'm running out of juice. I'm certainly not running out of energy, because all of my politics is, for good or for ill, motivated by concern for people less fortunate than me. I thought everybody's politics was like that. Or I certainly thought everybody who calls themselves a Christian was motivated by concern for people less fortunate than themselves, you know? It goes without saying. I thought that you go into politics in order to make life better for the people who life is least good for. I was a bit of a mug, actually, until Brexit happened. I was a bit naive. I was a bit foolish. There are plenty of people in the Conservative Party who I think do deserve that description. You might not agree, but I think you can see now the politicians that are prioritising concern for the citizenry ahead of ambition. And it is all viewed through the Brexit lens. So people like Nick Bowles or Dominic Grieve or Anna Soubry or Ken Clarke, all of these people are prioritising concern for their constituents, however their constituents voted, ahead of personal ambition. Some very surprising faces are swimming in the opposite direction, most notably Amber Rudd, who has now decided to prioritise personal ambition above her constituents, because they all understand that this will not be good economically for anyone except people heavily invested in the kind of companies and commercial interests that may prosper in the event of us shipping in less regulated, fewer protections and dodgier products. That's the only people, as far as I can see, who could make money out of this, are the people who have warehouses full of stuff that doesn't meet EU protection standards, i.e. stuff that is considerably less safe than the stuff what we buy now, of which the patron saint has become chlorinated chicken. And you only have to Google food poisoning rates, comparative food poisoning rates between the United Kingdom and America, to realise that the people poised to make a killing out of chlorinated chicken and its cousins will not be feeding it to their children. They will be feeding it to your children. And the people whose children will be eating chlorinated chicken and its cousins are the people upon whom some fascinating research undertaken by the UK in a Changing Europe think tank and the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, which is a charity, focuses. It looks at people in those so-called left-behind areas. Now, fact fans, and there are still a few of us left, Brexit was delivered mostly by relatively wealthy people of pensionable age in the southeast. That was the crucial constituency for delivering Brexit. People who, most measures attest, have enjoyed more luck and prosperity than any other generation in history. But they are also, as we see daily, they are also persuaded. Do you know, here is an astonishing statistic for you, which highlights precisely the point I'm about to make. 31% of Brexit voters and 41% of Trump voters, this is according to research by John Norton, believe in something called the replacement plan. Now, or the Kalergi plan, which I used to get mad tweets and texts about. And again, I used to think, oh, bless, I had no idea how far the madness had infected the population. So these are a bit like the protocols of the Elders of Zion, which sort of argued a massively anti-Semitic propaganda tool that argued Jews wanted to take over the world. The so-called replacement plan argues that the white majority, I'm going to need a little bit of instruction here from a massive racist, because obviously I'm not an expert on this, but the idea is that they want to get rid of white Anglo-Saxon culture or something like that. And it's all deliberate. I can't remember what the end game is or the result or the motivation for it. But someone told me yesterday, and I checked it out. They sent me a link. 31% of Brexit voters. So I sit here and say, how can you be, what are you worried about? You have literally benefited from the most prosperous and peaceful period of British history. You've come out on top. Why on earth are you voting to break the system? And the answer is 31% of them believe that there's a plan in place to sort of get rid of white people. And then you read that 40-odd% of the Conservative Party membership don't want a Muslim Prime Minister. You think two things, if you're me. First thing you think is, I wonder how Sajid Javid processes that. And the second thing you think is, oh, God, they get to choose the next Prime Minister. So I digress slightly, because what this has done, this research, is look at the areas where I have a little bit more sympathy for people, because they weren't voting to leave the European Union. I mean, there'll be an immigration-related issue here, but it makes more sense if you live in an industrial wasteland, if you live in a post-industrial wasteland. It makes more sense to feel a little bit aggrieved about the fact that all the fellas working at the hand car wash seem to be Polish. If you're living in a village in Somerset, or you're living in a commuter belt in Surrey, your experience of immigration is almost entirely positive until you open your newspaper. And that's why we constantly hear on this programme from people saying, oh, I didn't mean you. Oh, I don't mean you. No, I don't mean, oh no, not the people I know. All the other ones that I've never met, it may not even exist. They're the ones I'm frightened of. That's why I voted to leave. So actually, in the poorer parts of the country, where you do feel as if you're competing with people recently arrived here for jobs or housing, there's a little bit more logic to it and a little bit less bigotry and prejudice, which is why my heart breaks when I hear of people like Andrew Taylor, who voted for Brexit because he thinks the country needs a sort of shock therapy. He says, we are going backwards. At this point in my life, I am ashamed to be British. The country is falling apart. He lives in Halifax. His neighbourhood, he believes, is deteriorating, and he can point at drug taking, unemployment, litter in the streets as evidence that something has gone horribly wrong. And if somebody says to him, why don't we spend money on the police rather than sending it to Brussels? I don't think he's stupid. I certainly don't think he's racist. When he goes, oh, that's a good idea. It doesn't make sense economically, for reasons best expressed in my car boot sale analogy. You pay 20 quid to have a stall at the car boot sale, but you make a profit of 200 quid when you have it. Someone comes along and says, why don't we spend that 20 quid on doing up the kitchen? You go, oh, well, that's daft, because we'd be 180 quid worse up. But you don't. Your man in Halifax doesn't do that. He doesn't have it explained by the people telling him that we should spend this money on ourselves instead of sending it to Brussels. He doesn't understand that it's a prerequisite of our current free trading arrangements. And that's not his fault either. That's my fault. That's our fault. That's journalists. We've ducked this. So what they found in this research is that people are demanding jobs and support for local businesses against a backdrop of probable economic decline. And I know the last hour was a kind of time bomb hour, but this is astonishing when you think about it. Why did you vote to leave the European Union? Because I think that there'll be more money to spend in my community. I mean, the other thing that the Tories are touting at the moment is tax cuts. So I don't think you need to be Albert Einstein to realise that tax cuts plus economic decline does not add up to more money to invest in the poorest parts of the country. And the ultimate killer here is that when the European Union Development Fund allocates investment to areas, it does so according to need. It literally, look, Northern Ireland has some of the poorest neighbourhoods in the whole of the European Union, believe it or not. But when the European, it's why Cornwall got a lot of money, because parts of Cornwall are devastated. And what the British government does, of whatever hue, is allocate money according to political pragmatism. So, look, there's a marginal seat over there, and the constituency next door is a stone cold seat for us. You could stick a rosette on a teddy bear there and we'd win. So let's not build the factory there. But there's more poverty there than there is in the neighbouring constituency. Yeah, I know, but we've already got that constituency in the bag. Let's not build a new factory there. Let's encourage this company to build a new factory in the marginal constituency, and then we can stand up and say, we brought the factory to Kidderminster. So, potentially, things are going to get even worse in a lot of these areas. Then you throw in zero-hour contracts, which, of course, are one of the reasons why the employment figures are currently quite healthy at first glance. Have you got a job? Yes. Good. Unemployed. How many hours did you work last week? 2. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. I want to try and have a Brexit conversation, and I want to try to... I want to try and comfort these people. We'll talk to Anand Menon in a moment, who is one of the people behind this research. Is there any prospect, is there any hope for these people who voted Brexit, people in some of the poorest parts of the country who voted for Brexit because they thought it would bring money into their regions and their neighbourhoods? Is there any hope at all that their dreams are going to come true? 0345 6060 973 is the number that we need, or that you need. It'd be a bit weird if I rang myself. Although, frankly, stranger things have happened. Here are the numbers now. You will get through. I mean, everywhere they go, Newport, 56% leave. Southampton, 54% leave. A 32-year-old in Southampton, school leavers needed alternatives to going to university. Here's a care worker who voted leave in Newport. Too many people were stuck on low wages because they could not afford to update their skills. How is Brexit going to help people update their skills? Give me a call. And I'm not being glib or facetious or silly, I promise you. Is there any chance that these people are workshops? 68% voting leave. You could have a great time, says 37-year-old Jennifer Pringle. The town was buzzing, and she thinks somehow that by voting leave it will buzz again. I'm asking you the wrong question. If you think there is hope that these people will see their dreams come true, I desperately want to talk to you today. 0345 6060 973. But genuinely, how did these people end up believing? And I know some of the answers to this question will involve quoting the usual liars, but how did they end up believing that voting to leave the European Union could somehow make Worksop buzz again, or could help the underemployed of Southampton update their skills? This is the bit I missed. I missed it. I don't get it. So we're not going to mention immigration, all right? I'm not going to mention racism. All we're going to mention is money and investment, infrastructure, skills, jobs, people. The people who see themselves as being near the bottom of the pile were persuaded in their millions that Brexit would help them. From where I'm sitting, they're going to be hit hardest and first. For the 760 millionth time since June of 2016, please give me a ring and tell me why I'm wrong. So, is there hope that these people's dreams will come true? A fascinating piece of research into so-called left-behind areas and what they want after Brexit. The research has been conducted by the think tank The UK in a Changing Europe and the charity the Joseph Rowntree Foundation. Professor Anand Menon is the director of the former, the think tank UK in a Changing Europe. He joins me now. Why, Anand? Why have you done this research?
Well, we did this research partly because so many people since the referendum of June 2016 have been talking about what they label as left-behind places. We've had the sort of unparalleled sight of a Conservative Prime Minister in July 2016 talking about injustices and just about managing. We thought it would be a good idea to try and figure out what these people actually think they'd like to see happen to make their lives better. So encouraged to sort of hear their voices, which we don't hear very often.
And are there, I mean, you could get as many answers as there were respondents to this, but obviously what you're looking for are themes and tides, areas of broadish consensus and agreement. What did you learn?
Well, several things. I mean, firstly, I was struck by the profound localism of a lot of...
It's not a great phone line, Anand. I don't know if there's anything we can do about that. The profound what, my friend?
So the profound localism of
We've got to have to try and sort this phone line out. My apologies. I think you said localism, but the fact that I can't be 100% sure of that means that people listening on slightly less good quality radios and speakers will struggle even more. So I now have a switchboard full of people waiting to contribute to the conversation, but obviously I want to speak to Anand first before we continue. So let me clarify why we're having this conversation. Very, very simply, I want them to be right. I've spent my whole working life since 2016 desperate to be wrong. And I rarely wanted to be more wrong on this. The people who think that leaving the European Union will deliver boons and benefits to their specific, very specific areas, I'd love to give them some comfort, some optimism. Let's find out whether or not we can and try again with Professor Anand Menon. So the first really broad consensus to emerge was localism. People who believe that this national decision will impact very specifically and directly on their street, so to speak.
Well, not so much that. What I meant by localism was that the things they want to see happen are very local in nature, whether it's local crime, litter in the streets, more parks, more green spaces. There was surprisingly little of the kind of macro policy discussion that you see in the pages of the newspapers. Insofar as there was a very marked consensus amongst respondents that our economy doesn't work for them.
Yes.
The word rigged was used and so on. But going back to what you were just saying when you lost me on the phone line, this isn't a piece of work saying Brexit will be the answer to all these issues. But one of the things that Brexit has done, without a shadow of a doubt, is it has focused our attention on these issues, whereas I think before the referendum we simply weren't thinking about them enough. In that sense, at least, Brexit presents us with an opportunity for addressing this, though I should say, in the event of a no-deal Brexit, there will be no chance of addressing any of this because the damage will be severe and immediate.
And did your respondents understand that, or did the questioning not veer into that territory?
We didn't veer into that particularly. We touched on Brexit, but in no great detail, because in a sense this was a how would you like the country to develop in the future sort of exercise rather than what you think about Brexit. There was a high level of frustration with politicians that we heard from participants. This was from both Leave and Remain voters, this kind of sense of annoyance that politics isn't doing anything for them, and many people. So there was a guy in Dudley, who I remember, who said, in what other job would you get told to do something by your boss, refuse to do it, and not lose your job?
Yes.
And that was a reference to the Brexit process. So there's a degree of frustration with politics just not doing anything, and specifically not doing anything for them.
And yet, I mean, some of it is perhaps a slightly rose-tinted nostalgia. Oddly, I was reading about one of your respondents from Newport who talked about it having been previously a lovely place where everyone knew each other. It's so sad now to see all the homeless people and kids with no values. Now, oddly, and don't laugh, but I've joined a few local history Facebook groups for areas where I'd spent time as a child, and they're very well moderated, so no one's allowed to mention politics, but there is a sense of the good old days, even among people like me in their 40s. And one thing I sense from your research, or from the report in the I-paper today that I've read, is that people somehow think that there are halcyon days in the rearview mirror that we can revisit, that we can somehow go back to.
You're absolutely right. There is an element of that. But actually much more striking than that for me wasn't the sort of nostalgia, but the sense that some areas geographically, systematically do far better from them. The levels of anger about London and what was perceived to be the fact that London gets everything and they get nothing was absolutely striking to me, I have to say.
And is there evidence for that economically, or is it mostly anecdotal that they're basing their feelings on?
There's some some evidence for that economically. I mean, if you look at levels of investment per capita in transport, in education, they are significantly higher in London than elsewhere. Against that, you've got to balance the fact that actually the taxes paid for by people in London do a lot for the rest of the country as well. So it's not as simple as saying, we need to take money from London, but there is a sense in which we could invest more in areas such as those we visited and see pretty immediate impacts, I think, in terms of the sorts of things that people were looking for.
Now, finally, it may be that I've misconstrued your position on this. You've talked about it being a rare chance to re-examine the laissez-faire economic model that Britain has had in place pretty much since Margaret Thatcher got into Downing Street. And that would involve, presumably, more protection, or if you want to use the word that they often use to describe protections when they're trying to persuade people to surrender their protections, you could call it regulation. I'm a little puzzled as to where you derive any optimism at all for the idea of a more protection economy, more regulated economy, when most of the chief cheerleaders of Brexit never stop wanging on about how we need fewer protections and regulations for ordinary people.
Okay, well, I'm not allowed to take an official political position, but what I would say on this, which is frustrating, believe me, but what I would say on this is for me, it's less about regulations and protections. They're obviously very, very important. We didn't really get into that issue of, workers' rights and protecting those rights. It's as much about political attention and investment of both political attention and money in
I get
areas.
that, yes.
That's the main focus of this. I mean, we can have a very, very fruitful discussion about levels of worker protection and what leaving the European Union might mean. And clearly, those protections are going to be in danger once they're no longer constitutionalised in EU law. But this is about, for me, when I said there is an opportunity here, what I meant was the nature of our political debate has shifted radically since June 2016. And the sorts of things, let's face it, these problems aren't new. These problems don't date from June 2016. They preceded it. Many of them go back right to the start of the financial crisis. But what I find heartening is the fact that we're talking about things now, is the fact that people in the south have noticed the north of England.
Yes.
And that is, in a sense, the political opportunity, that if there's one thing we have to ensure, it's that these people don't feel so cut off, so hopeless, so without opportunity in future as they did in the past. And that is what led many of them to vote for Brexit in the first place.
And however anyone voted, you'd have to be nuts not to want these things to happen. But as we've established, it may not have been the fault of the European Union that the problems I've identified came into being in the first place. This is absolutely fascinating stuff. I didn't realise that the article I read in the iPaper today is republished from the Financial Times. If people want to dig even deeper into your research, Anand, where can they go?
Well, we will be in the next week or so publishing a very, very detailed report of what people were saying, and we're hoping in September to do a follow-up. So, I mean, by all means, go to our website and have a look.
Great stuff. Thank you very much indeed. Anand Menon, the director of the UK in a Changing Europe think tank. The four areas identified are, it's fascinating, the providing young people who did not want to go to university with jobs and training, helping low-paid adults to gain new skills, nurturing local businesses, and reviving high streets. Now, one argument you could make for having voted to leave was to abolish freedom of movement and therefore reduce the number of people going after jobs. But, of course, what this research reminds us of is if you want to earn more money, the best thing you can do is get more skills and training. I don't know where anyone's going to derive much hope that leaving the European Union, particularly on no deal, is going to somehow improve their prospects in that field. But, what do I know? It's 11:30. And it's actually terrifying now, this notion that people in so-called left-behind areas have identified four areas where they're most hoping for change in their communities, providing young people who, didn't want to go to university with jobs or training or both, helping low-paid adults gain new skills, nurturing local businesses and reviving high streets. I'd be in favour of all of those things. What I don't understand is why I would have been in a position where I thought voting to leave the European Union was going to deliver them. And I'd love you to have a crack at answering that. How did these poor souls, and that is not patronising, it's literal, actually, in material terms, how did these poor souls end up thinking that voting to leave the European Union would make them better off? Was it just that bus? Is it that simple? Not just the NHS that's going to benefit from all this money, but it's our high... How will leaving the European Union make our high streets better? Adam's in Sheffield. Adam, what would you like to say?
Well, I'm actually in Rotherham, James. First-time caller for you.
Very welcome.
And welcome to my personal hell, that is Brexit. Rotherham voted 67.9% to leave the EU.
That must be one of the highest. That must be, mustn't it, nationally?
Staggering, really. The day after the referendum, my best friend and I went over to Durham to collect his passports. He needed some new passports in a hurry. And I said to him, as we listened to you or Radio 4 or whatever, I said it was a protest vote against the perception that we have in these areas that we are getting left behind by London. And
this is the new thing, isn't it? This is going to be, sadly, I said a couple of years ago, it's going to start. You're going to need a new target when it's not Brussels anymore, and it's going to be flipping London. It's going to be London.
Exactly. They have to have a target. They've got to have a scapegoat. We had yesterday, my local member is John Healy.
Right.
I think I should know the name of my constituency. It's Wentworth and Dearne, I believe.
Yes.
But I'm right on the border of Rotherham and Wentworth and Dearne. It's a very unusual map.
Fair enough.
I'm in quite a well-to-do area of Rotherham, if there is such a thing. But when we had Sarah Champion, the local member for Rotherham, championing no deal
yesterday. You did. Haven't you explained? You've explained why. If she's in a 66-point-something% leave area...
Oh, absolutely. She's going for a jobs first Brexit.
Yeah.
Her job.
How did your friends and neighbours end up thinking? And this isn't a leading question. I'm genuinely interested to know. I could speculate about answers, but I want to hear yours. How did they end up thinking that somehow their lives would improve by voting this way?
It was immigrants.
Right.
Get immigrants out. That's all I heard. I mean, I moved back to the UK on Christmas Eve 2014 after 12 years in Australia and 3 years in New Zealand.
Yes.
And it was immigration. And there's these areas of Rotherham where there tends to be groups of immigrants live together.
Yes.
And I had people describing them as no-go zones. And I'm thinking, well, I just went to the local supermarket there and I didn't...
But these won't be, usually in the context of no-go zones, it's not Eastern European workers that are being accused of presiding over no-go zones. It's usually Muslims.
No, there was some of that,
right.
But there was a lot of blame on Romanians for some reason. Well, I've got a Romanian friend, and I never felt threatened by him. But then again, I'm a bit of a man of the world, I suppose.
Well, and I'm very conscious of not wanting to sound as if we're accusing these people of being stupid or racist.
They're not stupid.
No, exactly, they're not. But again, they just thought, if we get rid of all these Romanians, then what happens? How do their lives improve then?
Well, they don't. They'll find another target.
No, I know they don't, but you know they don't, but they don't know they don't. Why do they think they will?
Because it's propaganda. I mean, you look at the highest-selling newspapers in the UK. I mean, it's the Sun and the Daily Mail. They don't usually say, and I'm a student of these propaganda sheets. They don't say your life will get better because. What is maybe a? No, but they blame.
So you don't need to say this is what will improve. You just need to say this is why things are rubbish, and then they'll vote to change, even though the thing that they're being told is the reason why things are rubbish is not the reason why things are rubbish at all.
They seem to have a short memory here as well. I mean, Rotherham, think about it. Steel, it's part of Sheffield postcode. It's big steel producing town, or it used to be. A big coal mine in town. I mean, where I live in Wickersley, we had Silverwood Pit to the north, we had Maltby Pit to the east, we had Dinnington and Thurcroft to the south, we had Parkgate to the west. The house I was brought up in had a lot of work paid for by the NCB in terms of subsidence. And I remember coal miners from these mines meeting at the roundabout in Wickersley on a march and going into the centre of town on marches during the coal mining strike. I remember helping. I mean, my father was an officer in the Merchant Navy. He was an engineer and officer.
Yes.
And, he's voted Conservative all his life. But he's now voting Liberal Democrat because he says these people are putting young people out of work. I want my son to work. I'm the same age as you, James.
Yeah.
I got made redundant from the steelworks. And who paid for me to retrain and to get my higher national diploma in engineering? It was the EEC, so perhaps I am biased, but they made my life better.
They did. What steelworks were you in, if you don't mind me asking?
Temple Rolling Mill.
Okay, my granddad used to be at Metropolitan Vickers. The two plants there, I think he oversaw.
Well, there was, yeah. You look at all the steelworks that have gone and the coal mines that have gone. Who closed them? Who allowed them to close?
Yeah, but you're making some powerful points. I wouldn't want to reopen the coal mines. I mean, it was back-breaking, horrible work, but it meant that everybody had a wage, everybody had a job, everybody had security of sorts.
My mother, she died earlier this year, and she went to her grave saying, I thank God neither of my sons went to the coal mine.
Exactly.
My mum said, you can do any job except to be a coal miner. She even said I could be a politician if I wanted, but not a coal miner.
Well, yeah. I mean, you were raised like me. You're entitled to do anything. You've got as much right to the glittering prizes as anybody with a hyphen in their name. But here's the thing that I don't think either of us get, and I haven't disputed anything you've said. Charlotte Watkins, she's in Newport, 56% leave. Care worker, voted leave. Too many people were stuck on low wages because they could not afford to update their skills. How is she going to be helped by anything that's on the horizon?
She isn't, James. She isn't.
And the question you're not answering, because I don't think either of us can, because you'd have to somehow be inside her head. How did she end up thinking that voting leave would improve things for her? Immigration? She hasn't mentioned immigration.
No, but they can't because they're worried about getting the racist thing.
I don't think that works anymore. There we go. Finally, a point of disagreement. I don't know how often you listen to the programme, but people aren't worried about being called racist anymore. It's come round just like Steve Bannon said it would. Look at Donald Trump this week. 11:42 is the time. Adam, fascinating stuff. John is in Chelmsford. John, what would you like to say?
Hello.
Hello, John.
Hello there. I'm in the house building and office refurbishment, and have been for over 20 years now. And I remember when I used to work alongside a lot of Polish, Russian, Lithuanian, and they was on similar wages to what I was on at the time. And they used to earn their money. They used to live in like a house with maybe 10 of them in there, send all their money back home and build a house at home.
Yes.
And the problem is now is like I'm still on the same wage I've been on for the last 10, 15 years, and I'm self-employed.
Yes.
I have no regulations. I have I have no pension. I have no savings, nothing at all. And everyone keeps saying about, well, we're blaming immigration all the time, but the fact of the matter is that they can bring in three foreigners, paying £40, £50 a day to do the same work that I could do.
Well, that's illegal.
Well, it's illegal, but it happens all the time. It's a common practice with the big.
But it's illegal. So the problem is the law being broken, not the people being exploited by the lawbreakers. But anyway, let's park that for a moment because it's a well-known red herring. I'm not blaming you for swallowing it. It is a red herring. The people who are being paid less than the national legal minimum wage it doesn't matter where they're from. They're victims of crime. They're victims of exploitation. So when they're not here, no one's sweeping under the carpet. We're just calling it what it is, a crime. It's got nothing to do with the European Union membership. They're breaking the laws. They're breaking the rules.
The thing with it, though,
just wait a minute. Just wait a minute. Let's stop them all coming now, right? Free movement is.
I'm not even saying.
No, I know you're not. That's why I'm saying theoretically. Let's stop all these... Well, Russia's not in the European Union, but the Lithuanians and the Romanians and the Poles. What do you think will happen to your wages if that supply of legal labour... I can't... There's no point talking about illegal labour, but I understand why you went there. What do you think? What do you think is going to improve for you?
Well, I don't know at the moment because the fact of the matter is...
Well, you did ring me to answer that question.
Yeah, no, but what I'm saying is, Jay, is I am absolutely lost because...
Yes. Why do you think leaving the European Union is going to find you or help you find yourself?
Well, because the last 10 years, nothing's changed. If nothing's changed for the last 10 years... I'm looking
forward. Well, it could be worse than the status quo, John. You could have voted to make things worse.
Yeah, but James, me and a lot of my colleagues who do the same work I'm doing, we are willing to take the chance to sacrifice our own jobs to take a chance to see what happens.
You're willing to sacrifice your own job to see what happens?
Yeah, honestly, yeah. Cause I'm at the point now where I rent. But James, this is the thing. I rent. I have no savings. I have no pension.
No, I've got nothing but sympathy for your situation. I'm just fascinated by how you think losing your job. How is losing your job going to make anything better?
Because
John?
James, my job at the moment and my wages I earn at the moment are not improving my life. My life is still getting worse and worse.
But why do you think things are going to get better if you haven't even got that job?
But what else can I do? If my wages what I'm earning now, my job I'm earning now,
well, the answer to
not improving my life.
No, I know, but
we're
dancing around it. I mean, first of all, if I was right wing and lazy, I'd say, well, there's nothing to stop you changing and getting a better job. But I'm not right wing or lazy, so I'm not going to patronise you by saying that.
You're on about upskilling and stuff all the time.
I'm not. I'm telling you what the findings are among people who are in similar situations to yours.
I'm highly skilled as well in my job.
Well, what really?
Yeah, honestly, I'm highly skilled.
But your minimum wage?
No, I'm not minimum wage. I can earn £150 a day.
Well, hang on. I thought you were getting replaced by unskilled labour on £50 a day a minute ago.
Yes, because what they do is they can bring in 3 people for the same wage as me.
But then you're not doing skilled work then. I don't want to dig into your CV, mate. You're not making a great deal of sense.
Right,
all I want to know, all I want to know from you, John, is how do you think things are going to improve for you?
Right, well, just give us 30 seconds. I'll explain.
Good.
So what I'm saying is, what happens now on the jobs is they bring 3 people in for the same wage as me, and then I have to go back and redo their work for them on the same wage. You know, and I'm getting.
So when they're not here, you won't even have that work.
Well, but it's like I said, I'm willing to take the sacrifice and maybe have to change my job or go on benefits.
Why can't you do that now?
The status quo. I don't want to do that. I want to try and fight to try and earn more money, but. In 15 years, it's not changed. Nothing has changed.
But John, you're not. Either you're not hearing me, or I'm not being clear enough.
I'm hearing you, James. I don't think you're hearing me a great deal.
Well, no. In 15 years, nothing has changed. There are some illegal, unskilled workers that do your work, even though you're a legal, skilled worker.
Yeah, and like you said, we'll just sweep under the carpet. Still going
no one's sweeping anything under the carpet. I've completely acknowledged.
Everyone is.
Well, how can you? You're on national radio, saying it out loud, John.
But James, all we get is Remainers listening to the programme all the time. They don't want to listen to. They don't want to listen to me because I'll be called a Nazi or far right or that's what happens all the time.
Well,
whenever you say anything
forgive me, John.
You just get labelled.
What have you said that you think might see you labelled a Nazi?
Because I said that that's what happens all the time. So I've said about we should have less immigration.
Yes.
So straight away people
and that is what I'm asking you. How is that going to improve your life? Do you think?
I don't know.
Right, well, then we got there in the end. There's no shame in ignorance. It's just a really silly thing to do. If you're terrified or really unhappy about how things are now, you voted to make it worse.
What do I do about it? Do I just carry on the way it is?
Well, I've told you what you do about it. The politicians that you voted for think that you should get a different job or get some new skills or move. Do like Norman Tebbit said, get on your bike. But you voted for those politicians, John.
Did, but no one else.
I can't. Oh, Jesus, man! You voted for the ones that have told you that if you're not happy with what you've got, you get on your bike and you move somewhere else. You haven't voted for politicians that would have got you trade union protection. You haven't voted for politicians that would have clamped down on the exploitation of illegal under minimum wage labour. You haven't voted for the politicians that think there should be protections and regulations in the construction industry greater than what we currently have. You have voted for the people that want to take away what little you already have, man.
No one listens to us.
Oh, heavens above, John. I've just been listening to you for 10 minutes. All you've done is whine. I don't know if there is a single more depressing contribution to a conversation about Brexit than somebody who is already struggling, claiming that they are prepared to lose what little they have in the hope of a change that they cannot describe or specify. It breaks my heart. And it's usually the result of right-wing indoctrination that makes them think that somehow surrendering the protections, the regulations, the rights that they currently have is going to improve their situation. The people, what was the last fella called? Was it John? The people that John complains about, understandably and accurately, do you really think that the employers bringing in illegal labour... I sometimes wonder why I bother. If you've got somebody running a building site who's already breaking rules and regulations... Do you really think that having fewer rules and regulations is going to protect people? It's quite incredible to hear someone say, I don't mind if I lose my job. And then, of course, the newspaper columnists that he would be usually cheering along will be the ones that say, well, if you're not happy with your lot, get on your bike and get something else. And then let's get rid of all the immigrants. And then, of course, what work is there going to be? Because they're not just workers, they're customers. I took a call years ago from a bloke in Bishop Stortford who started wanging on about immigration. You could tell he was lying, culminating in him claiming live on the radio that he can't get to the till in his local shop because of all the immigrants. Do you remember? I just remember sitting there thinking, and saying, indeed, I wonder how the shopkeeper would feel about you getting rid of all his customers. Also, how the hell do you know the ethnicity or the geographical origins of everybody in front of you in a supermarket queue? Especially if you're talking about European Union migration, because you wouldn't even be able to reach lazily and inaccurately for skin colour. So what is going to get better? 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. What is going to get better? Naomi's in Westminster. Naomi, what would you like to say?
Well, we have at the campaign Best for Britain produced a website called myeu.uk, and what it allows you to do is no matter where you are in the UK, you can plug your postcode in and it tells you what the EU has actually funded in your local area, whether that is arts projects, whether it is skills for young people and workshops, whether it is hospital beds and the number of EU
I like that.
staff.
I'm familiar with your organisation. You're doing good work, but it's a bit late, Naomi, isn't it?
Well, we launched it about a year ago,
yes.
And more and more people need to use it. But you're right, it's a travesty that our government wasn't doing this before the referendum, so that people could understand exactly how much the EU has done for them. And the really scary thing is that when we look at the areas where the EU is funding a lot of this stuff, is exactly the areas where the government, historically, over decades and decades, has funded very little.
Yeah, there's not going to be much in my postcode either, but
even more deprived.
Because it's quite a sort of wealthy part of town. Here is the responses that I think you need to be able to field. First of all is, but if we stop sending £9 billion to Brussels, we'll be able to spend that money on all these things. We are actually net contributors to the European Union, so this is just our own money that they're giving back to us.
So the thing about this is that it tells you who the people are, where the doctors and nurses are. And what you've got to remember as well is that these are governments that, Conservative governments weren't investing heavily in Cornwall and the North East before we joined the EU, right. Before we joined the EC in the 70s. So I think it's a stretch to think that they would continue to do it. You
don't address properly. No, I may not either, but you don't properly address my point, though, when somebody listening to this will say, whether you can trust them or not, in terms of cold facts, all of the money that you're identifying is money we've sent to them and they've sent back.
Well, it's not just about cold hard cash, it's about the wider contribution of free movement. The fact that we have free movement and the fact that we have so many immigrants here doing brilliant work. The vast majority of immigrants are here working, paying taxes, and being huge contributors to the economy. They are doing the kinds of jobs that Brits haven't been able to do. People are often very worried about housing and the housing being a cause of Brexit. When we look at the construction sector, and one of your previous callers was talking about that, this is a sector that has got at any one time 30% vacancies. So it doesn't have enough.
So how does John not realise that?
Even with free movement.
See, John's not a liar. He was scared about being called a Nazi, but I'm still not quite sure why. But he wasn't. I don't think he was lying. He describes people coming in on day rates that are illegal, but which to do unskilled labour, which somehow, and I'm not going to pretend I understand how, somehow that compromises his wages as a highly skilled labourer. When I tell him there's 30% vacancies in his sector, he just doesn't see it. It's a meaningless statistic, whether it's true or not.
Well, every study done by everybody, whether it's been, the Greater London Authority have done it, whether it's been the industry itself, has shown that there has not been a deflationary impact on wages, particularly not in the construction sector, which is a typically quite well-paid sector. I think... But
it doesn't... I think you and I both sound sort of middle class, and we can sit here talking about 30% vacancies, and we've got the evidence to back it up. I'm not asking you to do alchemy, Naomi. I'm just trying to speak for John and say it doesn't mean anything to him. His wages haven't moved for 15 years. He doesn't feel that he's in a sector that is crying out for more bodies. He feels he's in a sector that's overcrowded. So how do you shift his perception? Or indeed, how does he prove that he's right?
So I think that there's an issue about facts and figures, absolutely, and we've got to get better at making the case emotionally and dispelling myths. But also, he's not that representative because the country has shifted. It's changed its mind on Brexit. And there are some people
he hasn't. John hasn't.
that will never be convinced.
John hasn't changed his mind.
There are a huge number of people in the middle who probably don't call into radio shows who are absolutely fed up of all of this. And they've seen that since we had the referendum in 2016, nothing's changed for them. Their life hasn't got better. And it's not the EU that was making their life bad. It was successive governments failing to invest in areas where we'd had deindustrialisation, where we hadn't built enough homes.
And yet he's convinced...
NHS is on its knees.
He's convinced that his financial situation is due to immigration. And you're suggesting he just always will be.
There are some people that, it's going to be incredibly difficult for them to change their minds. And what we've got to do is make sure that those people who are able to be persuaded, who haven't,
he wants a pay rise. He wants a pay rise, and he's voted to be poorer. I mean, how do you reach someone like that?
It's difficult. There are issues that do touch people, and the NHS is one of the few ones that does, bridge that divide, as well as social care. I think most people are now coming around to the fact that they're much more likely to be treated by somebody from another country as part of the NHS than behind them in the queue to see the doctor.
Maybe. And yet yesterday I took a call from a Donald Trump supporter who thought that free healthcare for all was the end of civilization as we know it. But you're about to tell me again that it may not be representative of a broader constituency, and I'm sure you're right. Naomi is the CEO of Best for Britain. You can go to myeu.uk to find out more about specific funding in your area, and she's absolutely right. What is heartbreaking is that because the EU apportion funding according to need, so they identify the most poverty-stricken areas as being most deserving of this investment, they are at odds with successive British governments of every hue who do have at least somewhere in their mind and in their reckoning the question of where will this money best be spent in pursuit of votes or political support, regardless of need. 12:01. Let's not mention immigration, we said, in pursuit of answers to the question of what do you think is going to get better. Looking at the research into some heavily leave voting areas that have struggled for generations with economic decline and similar, even if you curtailed all immigration tomorrow, the high street wouldn't get better. You wouldn't find it easier to get more skills in your job. The 4 areas identified by this fascinating research, although it's not, infallible, the 4 areas identified are, very simply, providing young people who did not want to go to university with jobs and training, helping low-paid adults to gain new skills, nurturing local businesses, and reviving high streets. So for people in deprived communities, their post-Brexit vision of a better future, I think it's fair to say, has next to nothing to do with matters for which the EU has responsibility. It's why the call from Chelmsford was so heartbreaking in many ways, although I suspect John will feel patronised when I say that. Andy Payne has tweeted, puts it best, feeling for John from Chelmsford. He's wrong, but he's right. No one listens to us. He's bought the free market, deregulated, deunionised charlatan spiel. It's the abject inequality that's at the heart of why people voted Brexit. And I think he's right. It is the sense that there is a party going on somewhere and I haven't been invited. But who is at the party? And how much does the party have to do with European Union membership? This is why the target is moving now, inevitably, sick of getting these predictions right, to London. London is now under attack on an almost daily basis. Oh, that London. As if there's no poverty here. As if there's no... first, on one day, London is full of no-go zones and no one would want to move there anyway because Sharia law or something. And then fast forward 24 hours and London is so completely out of touch with the rest of the country that they're all living in a metropolitan elite bubble. It can't be both, unless you're listening to liars. And speaking of liars, fascinating bit of work done by Channel 4 News in the case of a Brexit party, well, I say party, Brexit, quotes, party, end quotes, MEP. Just have a little listen to this.
Turning attention now to another part of the European Parliament, the biggest party in the institution this month, Nigel Farage's Brexit Party MPs, arrived in Strasbourg to take up their seats along with all their colleagues. One of the new batch is Alexandra Phillips, who now represents almost 1 million voters in the southeast of England. Phillips used to be the head of the press for UKIP, but we wanted to ask her about her involvement with the controversial political data company Cambridge Analytica. Aisha Tull, our reporter, headed to Strasbourg to meet her.
Nigel Farage and his Brexit party are on a roll as his new class of MEPs arrive in Strasbourg for the first day of the European Parliament.
We are the biggest party in the whole of Europe. How about that? That's not bad.
Farage and his 28 MEPs are now elected representatives to an institution they want to leave. One of them is Alexandra Phillips, who represents almost 1 million people in the southeast of England. So I've come to the European Parliament to meet her.
As the naughty Brexit Party non-Europhile rebels, we've been put on the outskirts of the parliamentary estate in a building I didn't even know existed. So
how long does it generally take you to get there, for example?
From here to my office, probably about 10 years. If it was me by myself, me and you and a bottle of Chardonnay, you'd have to beep a lot. You become a professional person. You're representing people, you're representing your party, you're representing your country, you're representing your electorate. So it's very different for just being Joe Soap.
Phillips is one of the most high-profile members of the Brexit Party. She was the head of press for UKIP, even starring in this party political broadcast.
In Turkey, it's actually a criminal offence to criticise the government that could land you with a jail sentence. Last year, 9 journalists were sent to prison in Turkey. It might explain why I felt more comfortable filming this back here in the UK.
She quit the party and entered the murky world of freelance political consultancy. And she's been repeatedly linked to Cambridge Analytica, the notorious political data company exposed by an undercover Channel 4 News investigation last year.
We just put information into the bloodstream to the internet and then watch it grow.
Phillips was part of a secret team deployed by Cambridge Analytica during the Kenyan election in 2017. The campaign was marked by misinformation. Fake news spread through the internet and smartphones. Apocalyptic videos like this, smearing Kenyatta's opponent, went viral in the toxic political atmosphere. But no one in Kenya seemingly knew who was behind it. Cambridge Analytica strenuously denied any involvement with these videos or any role in negative political campaigning there. Kenyatta's party, Jubilee, denied they were there at all.
The Kenyatta campaign, which we ran in 2013 and 2017 for Kenyatta.
And what you have done in the Kenya?
We have rebranded the entire party twice, written their manifesto, done 2 rounds of 50,000 surveys.
Huge amounts of research, analysis, messaging.
And then we'd write all the speeches and we'd stage the whole thing.
Just after Kenyatta's victory, Alex Phillips posted this picture of her in Kenya working with Jubilee.
You've worked in other countries. You worked for Cambridge Analytica in Kenya.
I didn't.
You worked for the press team for Kenyatta in Kenya. What was your role?
I'm not talking about that, and I can explain very clearly why I'm not talking about that. Because I'm under a non-disclosure agreement, okay? So this question can't go any further. Yes, I did work in Kenya, country I absolutely adore, lots of friends there, very good connections, lived there for a year. I can't tell you what I was doing, but it was a very... No, it wasn't. It was not. It wasn't. That's factually wrong.
Who have said that they did everything
wrong.
For Kenyatta's campaign?
I didn't work for them at all.
Why did
That's libelous. You can't put this online, my friend. I was working in Kenya, yes. I was working in Kenya during election time. True. I had lots of friends who were working in the Jubilee Party. Also true, because I was working with various political institutions during that election campaign to make sure that the election election passed peacefully. That was what my role was. I can't tell you anymore because of non-disclosure agreements. You're actually, no, listen, I'm being very serious now. Okay. You're actually propagating a load of misinformation that's been put online, apropos nothing,
Misinformation
based
was put
on
online
nothing.
about the opposition party and
I
about
wasn't
Raila
anything to
Odinga.
do with that. Go and speak to whoever did that.
But you were part of Kenyatta's campaign. You were working with Kenyatta, so it's a legitimate question.
I worked with multiple institutions. I worked with multiple institutions. If you want to talk about the Cambridge Analytica campaign, speak to them, not me. I don't know them. I really don't know the people. So I really don't think if you use this online, it's going to be very difficult, okay?
Okay, that's fine. At least I've asked you.
Yeah,
It was a Channel 4 News
you
investigation, and I have to ask.
And actually, do you know, please don't pursue that, because there's going to be a lot of things that might be happening over the next few weeks, months, which is going to make life very difficult. I'm being serious.
As a journalist, you're telling me what I...
No, I'm not. Look,
that's fine. We can just end it.
I've never been employed by Cambridge Analytica in my life. I was working in Kenya during the election campaign time. I worked alongside various people and various organisations during election time. Everything I was doing was in the interest of promoting peace, security and stability in that country.
Okay.
I love Kenya.
All right. Thank you very much, Alex, for your time.
Pleasure.
I'm going to take your microphone.
Phillips then called her lawyer to complain about us. But listen to what she told a journalist colleague in an interview back in 2017.
I've not been able to speak to you because I've been under my contract finished yesterday, so now I'm able to talk. But whilst I'm under contract with Cambridge Analytica, you know, if they had found that I'd spoken to a journalist about them, then you know what I mean? Non-disclosure agreements, all the rest of it. I wasn't working for Jubilee. I was employed by Cambridge Analytica, who had the contract with Jubilee. Brought on as a political communications consultant for the Kenya project. I'd be writing the president's speeches and his talking points for rallies and state house statements, and I trained their communications team. They were sort of journalists who came together to create a press office, so I had to train them up and daily management of that communications team. For $6 million, they got me and another chap who are two of the best in the business at doing this kind of stuff, and paid us, you know, nowhere near that much, my friends.
Last night, Alex Phillips changed her story. In a statement, she told us she had worked with President Kenyatta and that the work was subcontracted out to me by SCL, Cambridge Analytica's parent company. She said she would continue to respect her confidentiality agreements out of respect for those whom I served. And she claimed she would not be bullied by what she called guilt by association reporting.
Someone called Alexandra Phillips, a former, she's now a Brexit, quotes, party and quotes MEP. And I think she used to work for UKIP, a former head of media at UKIP, stating categorically on the record to Channel 4 News that she'd never worked for Cambridge Analytica. And then being presented subsequently with a recording of her telling a different journalist at a different time that she had. And a lot of the questions I ask you, how have people ended up where they've ended up, is because people are lying to them now with absolute impunity. Absolute impunity. Quite incredible. Speaking of the Brexit, quotes, party end quotes, one of them tweeted a picture yesterday saying we're the only people here, we're the only party attending this debate. Someone else pointed out that it was a break, and they proved it by zooming in on the watches being worn by the people in the picture. And I thought, when I saw that on social media, I thought no one would treat their own supporters with that much contempt. Nobody would treat their own voters and supporters like complete idiots. And it turned out that it was a break. So they took a picture during a break and claimed that they were the only people in the chamber for a debate. And I'll play you that again, because this woman won't lose her job. British politics has been so successfully broken by the Brexit lies and the Brexit lies that now you can get busted, you can get caught lying, and nothing will happen. Nothing will happen. Listen again. In some ways, it's the wrong way round, because it's at the end that she says, I never worked for Cambridge Analytica, I never worked for Cambridge Analytica, and it's the tape recording of the conversation. So, well, now that I don't work for them anymore, I can tell you. It's quite incredible, right? And I know whataboutery is usually a fairly pointless exercise, but imagine if this was Diane Abbott. Just imagine if Diane Abbott was caught in a bare-faced untruth like this, what do you think would happen to her? Hey, she gets some sums wrong or gets caught drinking a Prosecco on a train, and it's like the Spanish Inquisition. Just listen to... This is what British politics has been reduced to, right here, in a nutshell. Prominent, or maybe not prominent, but politician, taking money from the public purse, being interviewed by a journalist, that curious, listen to the tone as well, that patronising, dismissive... You know, the bloke in Chelmsford saying nobody listens to me. These people pretend that they do. And yet, actually, that dismissive, arrogant, that's libel, my friend. I don't know about what you'd need to have going on in your mind to have one voice in the back of your head saying, oh, yeah, they've got me banged to rights on this, and another voice going, not only are you going to deny it now, you're going to threaten legal action. Have another listen.
It didn't work for them at all.
Why did
That's
you
libels. You can't put this online, my friend. If you use this online, it's going to be very difficult, okay?
So now I'm able to talk, but whilst I'm under contract with Cambridge Analytica, you know, if they had found that I'd spoken to a journalist about them, then... You know what I mean? Non-disclosure agreements, all the rest of it.
Please don't pursue that, because there's going to be a lot of things that might be happening over the next few weeks, months, which is going to make life very difficult. I'm being serious.
As a journalist, you're telling me what I...
No, I'm not. Because I'm look,
that's fine. We can just edit.
I've never been employed by Cambridge Analytica in my life. I was working in Kenya during the election campaign time. I worked alongside various people and various organisations during election time. Everything I was doing was in the interest of promoting peace, security and stability in that country. I love Kenya.
And in a statement released to Channel 4 News last night, after that recording was brought to her attention, Ms Phillips admitted working for SCL, Cambridge Analytica's parent company, on President Kenyatta's successful re-election campaign. And you know it's going on, but sometimes it's so barefaced, so egregious, so out there, that you do genuinely wonder how anybody could still be labouring under the illusion that the Emperor has any clothes on. Quite incredible. There's a rather special new Netflix film coming out imminently, I think it's tonight, looking at Cambridge Analytica, and the filmmakers behind that documentary will be joining me in the studio, coincidentally, in about 17 minutes' time. The question remains... You move to some of the poorest parts of the country, ask people why they voted Brexit, and if we leave immigration, they don't mention immigration in this research, but they mention things like high street decline, lack of training for people who don't go to university, lack of opportunity for people who want to learn more skills. And then you speak to people like John in Chelmsford, who is happy to lose his job, apparently, because he's so unhappy with the status quo. And I believe him, up to a point. That point being when he does actually lose his job, and he will not go, yes, I love it when a plan comes together. He'll go, what the hell was I thinking? And the answer is, John, you were thinking these people were telling you the truth. Charles is in Bagshot. Charles, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi, James. Thanks for taking my call. Normally I don't hear your show because I'm at work, but this is my day off. But in regard to that caller, I do feel for he feels threatened by cheap labour.
He feels threatened by cheap labour, but is also highly skilled. I don't want to haul him over the coals retrospectively, but it's one or the other.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, the same thing where people didn't talk about this was the similar sort of what's supposedly happened to all the tradesmen now, the so-called people coming in and doing low-paid jobs, was happening in the IT industry for years.
Yes.
And they think, oh, well, once we leave the EU with no deal, let me tell you what's going to happen. When we go onto WTO, and it comes to doing the trade deal with India, and India's already hinted at this, they will want complete and absolute liberalisation of visa access for workers. So, and people will say, oh, well, they can't do plastering and that. Who do you think built half of Dubai? So if you don't like what's happening now, just what? Because it'll all be to benefit the city of London. when I say the city, I mean the city, Canary Wharf.
No, I know you
You're
do.
not talking about the city.
No, I know. Capital C. City with a capital C.
Yeah, the hedge fund managers, they'll benefit from this.
Because they hate protections, they hate regulations, and they hate food because they can make more money when there's a free-for-all, when there's a bonfire of regulations. But, I don't know, maybe it's my fault. Well, someone like John just doesn't hear this. He just doesn't hear it. And that's the bit where I get frustrated. I make no apology for getting frustrated. It's a miracle I don't get more frustrated. Because you're reaching out to help someone like him by pointing out the people that are conning him and lying to him, and he feels victimised then. He feels insulted. He feels he's about to be called a Nazi. That's still now the failure for the media, or for me anyway.
Just to sum up, in quick summary, I would just say this is very similar, in a way, Brexit, to the Prohibition era. What made people realise Prohibition was a bad idea was when they actually had to start living under it.
Yeah.
So perhaps the only way people are going to be woken up is, sadly, through no deal.
Do you know, every day we keep coming back to this point. I did it yesterday with Margaret Beckett. Whenever we talk about Brexit, this suggestion that people will not realise that fire burns until they put their hand in the fire. And I know some people consider it to be a parenting tactic. Let your child touch a hot plate once. I just can't do it, mate. I don't know why. And I'm beautifully insulated from a lot of the problems that will happen. Not all of them, but a lot more than most. I just can't sit back and say, all right, off you go, jump off that cliff. Let Boris Johnson rescue you. Let Jacob Rees-Mogg bail you out, John, when you lose your job. I can't do it. And yet I think deep down, I think Charles is probably right. When you speak to people like that, and Naomi from the Best for Britain organisation is right when she says, you know, there'll be plenty of people who will never phone a phone-in station who are susceptible to reason, but I don't think there are enough of them. And then, of course, the problem becomes that if it does all go belly up, they won't blame it on the people that told them it was going to be brilliant. They'll either pretend they wanted things to go belly up. I don't think, personally, that one will last for very long. Or they'll start blaming it on, I think, at the moment, London seems to be moving to the front of the queue for reasons why my life hasn't gone better. Don't ask me any more, like why or how or when or where. Just say London. Flipping London. London. 12:18. What the UK's left-behind areas want after Brexit. In short, they want young people who don't want to go to university to find it easier to secure jobs and training. They want low-paid adults to get help to gain new skills. They want local businesses to be nurtured. And they want high streets to be revived. I mean, it's a beautiful picture painted. I think inevitably we fail to keep immigration out of the conversation. An awful lot of people feel their lives will be improved if other people were prevented from coming here. Again, doesn't matter how much evidence you've got that that's not true. It's a feeling, and people can't be argued out of deeply held feelings. But the high street, and we might do this tomorrow, actually, looking at the clock, the high street stuff and the local businesses stuff, we literally this week heard Jeremy Hunt say what would happen in the event of no deal to a local business to my mum. A company in Cookley near Kidderminster that makes something to do with wheels. I'm not a big automotive expert. 260 jobs, plus all the attendant jobs. I was at home the weekend before this one, and one of Mum's friends said she knows someone whose husband works in that factory. And she was one of the people on Facebook punting all the stuff about Sharia law and immigration and no-go zones. And a couple of people had said to her, what do you think about this? I mean, all for reasons of Brexit. And a couple of people have said, how do you feel about the fact that you voted for your husband to lose his job? And she hasn't replied, or she hadn't at this point. John in Chelmsford, who we spoke to earlier, and I bear him no ill will. I hope you can tell from my voice. I'd give the fella a hug if I thought it would help. John would respond to that by saying, I have voted to lose my job because it will somehow make things better. Somewhere, somehow. And I just want to know where and how. That's all. How is making yourself poorer going to make things better? 0345 6060 973. The high street stuff, I think, is a little bit anachronistic almost. I think it's nostalgia for days that will never return. If you want to revivify the high street near where you live, turn off your internet and do all your shopping face to face. That will not only revivify the high street near where you live, it will also help local businesses. But we don't do it. Not least because, all right, one idea, okay? An Amazon warehouse is not a wholesale storage facility, it's a retail facility. And therefore the rates and taxes paid for an Amazon warehouse out of town should stand comparison with a high street shop. Again, it's bold and it might sound bonkers, but how can I compete with my little toy shop on Cumberton Hill? Or my little dress shop like my mum used to have? It's become a dog grooming parlour now, I noticed. How can I compete if I've got to pay business rates and you are flogging stuff online out of a warehouse where the rates and rents you pay are per metre and per square metre a tiny, tiny fraction of what I pay? So, again, I think there is room for bold legislation and change, but everything would be easier to do if we weren't about to kick our economy in the proverbials. Ben's in Leeds. Ben, what made you pick up the phone?
Hi, James.
Hello, Ben.
So for a bit of context, I used to be a policy advisor for the North East Chamber of Commerce.
Okay.
So this used to be sort of a daily frustration. My remit was trade and EU affairs at the time before Brexit. And sort of the run-up to the referendum, we did a lot of research with sort of the thousands of businesses in membership. And I think, quite funnily, by contrast, about two-thirds of the members of the chamber wanted to remain at the time because they saw the benefits. And we obviously think of the big obvious businesses up there like Nissan and the likes of Barber, who obviously do a lot of work, and trying to get the message across to people that, you know, Brexit could potentially risk investment, could risk their job, their lives, was talking to a brick wall, I guess. And you mentioned a lot of...
Why do you think that was? What was it that what would they reach for in response to your reasons and evidence? Or even expert analysis, because none of us have got a crystal ball. You know, we might discover some miracle new fuel under Stoke Newington in the morning, and we'll be like Norway. We'll be one of the richest countries in the world. Our sovereign wealth fund will be enormous. But let's presume we don't. What do they reach for? Because, you know, is it always immigration?
Well, that's the hard thing. I mean, you think it might be. I mean, I always find the thing with the North East is that, you know, predominantly it's hugely white. I mean, I grew up there, I went to secondary school there, but I think when I did research back then, about 1.6% of the migration in the UK was only in the North East, which was only slightly behind Northern Ireland at the time.
Is that right?
So it seems a very strange thing to be concerned about and worried about.
Yeah, but I remember speaking to that funny bloke who ended up as the MP for Clacton, and he was banging on about the legitimate concerns of his constituents, and I had the census in front of me, and it was very similar. You know, the percentage of his constituents that were not immigrants was in excess of 97%, and he still claimed it was legitimate concern. So if I read in the paper that they're coming over and nicking my jobs, it becomes a legitimate concern regardless of whether it's true or not, and that's the brick wall that you beat your head against every day.
Completely. And to be honest, the area you touched on a minute ago to do with the high street is very much key. People look at what's going on in their lives. And, you know, down the road from where I'm from, in Bishop Auckland, for example, the high street there has generally been quite devastated in terms of a lot of closures. As you said, sort of the classic, you know, betting shops and such.
Tattoo parlours, dog groomers, charity shops, coffee shops.
And people never go in there. And one of the reasons, as you said, is business rates. Another reason is to do with high parking charges, because down the road there's a massive retail park with, you know, Sainsbury's, Asda, TK Maxx, all of the big shoppers. And you think, well, naturally, rather than pay £5 for parking to go to a high street that hasn't got much in it, you'd rather go there. And when they look to who to blame, rather than look at, say, you know, cuts to the local authority or the local authority itself, they say, well, actually, you know, the EU is essentially the problem here. You know, look at what's happening there. All of the money is going to the EU. And it's an easy person to blame, isn't it? I think it's always to blame the other, to blame the EU as sort of the root of all the problems.
How long do you think, and this is a speculative question that you might feel is a little bit beneath your expertise, but, you know, people saying they're willing to take a hit for the long-term benefits or the potential future they were promised. Mark puts this well. How long before they start to demand where their better life is then?
That's a hard question, because you think when you say to someone that their job is at risk, I think completely people just do not believe it. They go on.
Even when Jeremy Hunt stands up and says, if we leave, and he is saying, I will do it, I will do it. By the way, This little factory I visited outside Kidderminster last week, they'll all be out of work, but I will do it with a heavy heart, even when they stand. So it's only really Boris Johnson who is still talking absolute bilge, and then people lining up behind him like Andrea Leadsom and presumably Jacob Rees-Mogg. So at some point they're going to say, hang on a minute, where is maybe not sunlit uplands anymore, but just a little mild improvement in terms. When does this short-term hit end? How long do you reckon the government's got?
I mean, James, it's hard to predict anything these days. I think, as you said, with Boris in particular, saying he's going to, he's flaked about a lot with that sort of October deadline. I think they both said that, wasn't it most recently, that they're both going to meet it.
Yes.
And you would think that, with the Labour, Conservatives, Brexit Party and Lib Dems all pulling around 20% up and down, you don't know what's going to happen. So are they going to have that? I mean, they're not going to be able to get through anything through Westminster due to the
then it will be fascinating, won't it? It will be absolutely fascinating to see whether or not it does turn into a sort of London gets scapegoated somehow, or I don't know.
Completely. And for the North East, there's a lot of parts of the North and also the South West, London is obviously seen as getting the benefits of a lot of, funding from the EU, a lot of things. They don't see the benefit on the street, as you said, despite the fact that actually the North East was a net beneficiary of the funding it put into the EU when you had a breakdown.
And the employers told their workers to...
Oh, yeah, I mean, all of the workers here, we had letters from some of the big employers in the North East telling their employees about it. And it's not just the people directly affected in the actual jobs. It's the supply chains. It's the retailers around the businesses.
Of course it is. It's the sandwich shop on the corner that employs 3 people and serves almost exclusively workers in that factory. But it's also the people making the parts, making the production lines that make the parts, making the air conditioning units that keep the people working on the production lines cooler, making the boots that they wear, the overalls that they work in. Do you know what? I think I'm going to dedicate the rest of my life to looking for glimmers of hope. Well, not my life, but at least until the end of October. 12:30 is the time. Oddly enough, a rare sparkle of good news, I think. Talking about London and talking about politics and talking about left behind areas. Well played, Channel 4 News, not just for busting that lying MEP last night, but they've just appointed a new political correspondent. It's a journalist I follow, actually, on Twitter, because she's the Westminster correspondent for the Yorkshire Post. More of that, please, London media. More people promoted from the regions, whether it's regional newspapers like the Yorkshire Post or regional broadcasters. I might be talking myself out of a job here, but still, it would be good to hear more voices from more parts of the country in coverage of the country's politics. Speaking of the country's politics, how are the 4 areas most keenly identified by Leave voters in so-called left-behind areas likely to be improved by leaving? Chiefly, local businesses, high streets, training for low-skilled workers, and training plus jobs for young people who don't want to go to university. How are any of those areas going to be improved by the course we are currently on? Mark's in the Wirral. Mark, what would you like to say?
I'd like to say that I have benefited from Brexit.
Good.
Okay.
Yes.
And I will tell you why.
Good.
It is all about freedom of movement, and it is all about the fact that there are less people coming in for jobs from Europe.
Yes.
My experience was I was working in one job and Brexit happened and the result...
But I mean, I'm sorry to split hairs. Brexit hasn't happened yet, but I know what you mean.
Well, no. Okay. The results of Brexit happened because the results of Brexit have already started to happen in that not so many people are coming in from Europe and people are going home because they feel like they don't want to be here, which is just a natural result of the referendum vote.
Well, I think a lot of the Leave campaigners were at great pains during the campaign to say that they didn't want anybody to feel unwelcome and that immigration had made a great boon to our country. So I'm delighted you've done well out of it, but we mustn't start rewriting history. I agree with you. Well, of course it was going to make people feel offended and alienated, but let's not forget that the Leave campaigners pretended that it wouldn't.
Okay, but But in reality, here in the northwest of England, that has happened.
Yes. Not on a massive scale. How many people do you think applied for national insurance numbers on Merseyside last year?
Well, okay, James. I don't know.
Take a guess, because it's a really interesting number. How many EU workers applied for national insurance numbers on Merseyside last year, where you are?
Maybe 2,000 or 3,000.
No, mate. So you think 2,000 or 3,000 people? That's it? That's the immigration you're talking about?
Yes.
Okay.
Because the thing is that it is in certain sectors of the economy. It's not in other sectors of the economy. And
So just briefly, because I've got some guests in the studio, I promise that's the only reason I'm moving on. To tell me your good news. You got a better job. Doing what?
I work in electronics.
Yes.
Okay. I build stuff for the likes of Sellafield and Hinkley Point and the utilities, Thames Water, etc., etc.
Yes.
Okay.
And you've got a better job because there were fewer candidates?
Yes.
Cool. I'm delighted for you. I really am. I mean, I got a book deal out of it, but I still don't think it's worth flushing the country down the toilet. Speaking of flushing the country down the toilet, I am joined in the studio now by the two people responsible for making this new Netflix documentary that I've been referring to in the course of the morning. I don't know your names because you're a little bit late. I shall forgive you for your tardiness. Jehan and Karim. There we go. We got there in the end. We don't have a huge amount of time, so Karim, you go first. Why should my listeners watch this documentary about Cambridge Analytica on Netflix?
Because you've been attacked. Your liberal democracy has been attacked, and the British public, as opposed to rallying together as they did historically when Nazi Germany was storming at the gates, is instead fighting each other over, Remain versus Leave still, and getting stuck into the semantics and not realizing that the reality is that Mark Zuckerberg couldn't even show up to British Parliament and address the investigations that have been happening. Liberal democracy has been under attack because data is the new oil, and data is unregulated, and your personal property as British citizens has been weaponized and used against you to affect the way you think.
And yet nobody thinks that they were affected by it. So even if you've assembled huge amounts of evidence about the effort that was put into manipulating that data and to persuading people, in my view, I mean, you're preaching to the converted with me, to vote against their own interests, nobody I've spoken to thinks that they were actually manipulated.
Nobody wants to believe that they're persuadable, right?
Yeah.
Because we're all too clever for that. But at the same time, a lot of people believe that their phones are listening in on them because of the way that they get these strange adverts that they've never really mentioned but were thinking about. Here's the news. Your phones are not listening in on you. The reason why you feel that way is because you're leaving behind these digital footprints constantly. And think of it as basically there's a voodoo doll of you out there that is constantly being collected up to speed with all of your data. And it's got a really good ability to predict your behavior. Proof? Facebook and Google's entire business model is predicated on that. Have you ever given Facebook or Google any money, any of the listeners? You probably haven't. So how do you ask, how are they some of the most powerful companies in the world if you've never given them any money? Well, the reason they're one of the most powerful companies in the world is because the admission fee to the connected world has been this notion that you give up all your data and we give you services. Guess what? There's a price that's come with it, a huge societal cost, like democracy. And whose balance sheet is that showing up on? It's not showing up on Google and Facebook's. It's showing up on your balance sheet as citizens of this country who have had their democracy attacked and are unable to see who the real perpetrators are. Facebook is a crime scene.
Facebook is a crime scene. These are pretty strong words. The film, I should add, is called The Great Hack. Jehan, how does the documentary unfold? You two have got a great pedigree as filmmakers, and you have a particular interest in the changes, the seismic changes that social media is affecting on populations who, as Karim's just reminded us, are often not just unaware of the changes that are affecting them, but are in complete denial about it. So if I were a skeptic, if perhaps I'd voted to leave the European Union as a result of stuff I'd seen on my Facebook feed, if I watched your film, would I see the light?
what's happening is invisible. That's why it was difficult to make a film about it, because and there's a deficit of language because it's such a new topic that we're now in our hands at all times. We have this technology that is playing with confirmation bias. So basically, it's motivated. Our technology that we're using is motivated to keep you online longer and to sell you things. And so there's this boomerang effect, which you see in the movie, which is explained in the movie. Now, how do you explain something that's invisible? You use, when you see it, it's been described as, oh, I thought this was a Black Mirror episode. Turns out it's real life. And the people that take us through this sort of high-stakes thriller adventure story are some of your very own journalists, Carol Cadwalader, and she's been obsessed by this topic for a long time and was an incredible guide through this. Brittany Kaiser was another character who we rely on characters to really take us through these stories, and she takes us through the Trump campaign, Brexit. She takes us through. She's partying in Ibiza when she gets told that she's being investigated by Mueller. So she was somebody who could really take us through these rooms that we would never ordinarily get to see.
And this leads us to Cambridge Analytica, which is, I don't think when you began putting the project together that was going to necessarily be the focus of your film, but that was almost around every corner. This is what you came up against, this curious company that is still mired in controversy, doesn't officially, of course, exist anymore. Did you hear the Brexit Party MEP on Channel 4 News last night? I don't know when you landed in Britain.
No, we were at our screening last night.
Have a listen to this. I'll play it to you in a minute. This is an MEP in Nigel Farage's new vehicle, the Brexit Party, denying at the beginning of the clip that she ever worked for Cambridge Analytica.
It didn't work for them at all.
Why did
That's libels. You can't put this online, my friend. If you use this online, it's going to be very difficult, okay?
So now I'm able to talk, but whilst I'm under contract with Cambridge Analytica, if they had found that I'd spoken to a journalist about them, then, you know what I mean? Non-disclosure agreements, all the rest of it.
Please don't pursue that, because there's going to be a lot of things that might be happening over the next few weeks, months, which is going to make life very difficult. I'm being serious.
As a journalist, you're telling me what I...
No, I'm not, because I'm a look,
that's fine. We can just edit.
I've never been employed by Cambridge Analytica in my life. I was working in Kenya during the election campaign time. I worked alongside various people and various organisations during election time. Everything I was doing was in the interest of promoting peace, security and stability in that country. I love Kenya.
There's an MEP, I know you didn't hear all of it, Johan, because I didn't tell you to put your headphones on. I'm such a professional. There's an MEP, a member of the European Parliament, categorically stating she'd never worked for Cambridge Analytica, and then being presented with a recording of her speaking in 2017 in which she said, I was under contract to Cambridge Analytica and having to undertake what we in British journalism call the mother of all reverse ferrets. But that is illustrative of just how murky Cambridge Analytica is. This person is on national television lying, because she says it would be libelous, i.e. defamatory, i.e. it would involve reputational damage to her for someone to accuse her of having worked for the company that it turned out she did actually work for. Give me a thumbnail sketch of why Cambridge Analytica became the focus of your film.
It was a completely murky world, but it had its fingers in so many of these very surprising changes that happened. I mean, Brexit and Trump was kind of a shocking events that happened, and so we really wanted to dig deeper, and there are many Cambridge Analyticas out there, and there will continue to be. So really, it wasn't only about Cambridge Analytica. I mean, that was a watershed moment, and it really shed light on the whole issue, which is why we focused on it. But the story is actually much bigger. The story is ultimately about Facebook and whether, unless we make certain changes and hold our these tech platforms accountable, we're looking at the elimination of our free will.
And yet, I come back again to what I said to Kareem. Because I do this for a living. People ring me every single day. People who have clearly sometimes it falls apart on air. Sometimes they'll say, oh, but I've seen this document. And I'll say, where did you see it? And they'll say, it was on my Facebook feed. And I'll say, read it to me. And they'll read it to me, and I will point out to them, I'll do a live fact check, that it's simply not true. But that caller doesn't go away thinking that they voted wrongly in Brexit. They go away feeling that I've somehow insulted them or condescended to them. And I know this isn't in your film, but I look at some of your previous work. You looked at how Facebook had influenced the Arab Spring, for example. I mean, Facebook just keeps going from strength to strength, doesn't it? There's no accountability. You don't. I suppose I'm sort of very politely suggesting you're not landing any punches on them.
Well, no, I mean, I think Facebook is the world's largest superstate, you know, with 2 billion constituents at this point. And we've entered into a place where we need to write a new social contract. The problem is that that social contract can't just be between citizens and governments anymore. It needs to be between citizens, government, and technology platforms, and it's called the user agreement. And we need to author a new user agreement, one in which where consent is part of the design of our privacy and consent over which data we want to give and not give. Do you want to live in a society where all of your recorded behavior is for sale? Do you want to live in a society where your democratic process can be commoditized? Because that's where we've entered into. And I think it's important for the people in this country who are shining a light, like Carol Cadwalladr, to the truth, who are now being sued by people like Aaron Banks, to have, to not be left alone during these times, because we've never, in an era where the truth has never been more contested, we need to support independent journalists who have the courage to shine these big lights and hold hold truth to power.
And I can think of a few better places to start than on Netflix watching The Great Hack at your earliest opportunity. Thanks ever so much for coming in. It's a pleasure to meet you both.
Thank you.
And well done for your work. Just in conclusion for that curious little Cambridge Analytica episode, that statement that Alexandra Phillips gave to Channel 4 News last night said, "In Kenya I worked as a freelance contractor, focusing on speechwriting with the team of President Kenyatta, who is a great ally of the UK. The campaigns I worked on promoted peace and national unity in a country that I love dearly. The work was subcontracted out to me by SCL, which went on to become a different company. Out of respect for those whom I served, I will continue to respect the confidentiality agreements that I signed upon accepting the role in Kenya, and I will not be bullied by agenda."
Coming up at 1 on LBC.
Poor old CO Time has been severely curtailed. You've been absolutely squished and squeezed and squashed, but it doesn't matter. Let me predict. Jeremy Corbyn got criticised by Theresa May for not dealing with anti-Semitism. Theresa May got criticised by Jeremy Corbyn for not dealing with Islamophobia. One side cheered, the other side booed.
You're looking at Twitter, you're cheating.
I'm not looking at Twitter at all. I'm staring off into the middle distance. Is that what happened?
Yes.
Okay. Well, we don't even need that long then. What should we do next? Should we go back to the first? So,
We'll just shout at each other that you're racist.
Sit down! Sit down!
Boo, hiss. Theresa May attacked Jeremy Corbyn. It is, of course, her penultimate Prime Minister's questions. Next week is the last one.
Of course it is, yeah.
The penultimate time that we will hear Theresa May at the dispatch box taking questions live in the House of Commons from Jeremy Corbyn. Jeremy Corbyn went on climate change and the government's record on climate change. Theresa May hit back and said he has no right to criticise her record given his record when it comes to dealing with anti-Semitism.
He needs to apologise for his failure to deal with racism in the Labour Party. Just today, 60 distinguished members of the Labour Party have written in the newspapers, "The Labour Party welcomes everyone except, it seems, Jews." This is your legacy, Mr. Corbyn. You still haven't opened your eyes. You still haven't told the whole truth. You still haven't accepted your responsibility. You have failed the test of leadership. Apologise now.
Theresa May referencing that advert in The Guardian on page 20 from 67 Labour peers demanding that Jeremy Corbyn get a grip with anti-Semitism and criticising his leadership. Jeremy Corbyn hit back Theresa May and said that she had failed to deal with Islamophobia within the Conservative Party.
Anti-Semitism has no place in our society, no place in any of our parties, and no place in any of our dialogue. Neither does any other form of racism. And when 60% of Tory party members think Islam is a threat to Western civilization, and the Prime Minister has said she will act on Islamophobia within her own party. I hope she does. I look forward to seeing that being dealt with, as we will deal with any racism that occurs within our own party as well.
Racism dominated Ian Blackford, the leader of the SNPs. 2 questions to the Prime Minister and why Theresa May, in his view, hadn't taken a tough enough stance against Donald Trump and his racist tweets about those 4 congresswomen.
Mr. Speaker, let me be clear. Donald Trump's actions are textbook racism. They are repugnant. And diplomatic politeness should never stop us from saying so. Will the Prime Minister now, on reflection, also take the opportunity to call out and condemn the racism of the go-home vans that she created in coalition government with the Liberal Democrats?
Theresa May's spokesman did on Monday say that the Prime Minister thought that Mr Trump's tweets were unacceptable and wrong. Theresa May repeated that in the House of Commons.
I said at the time that was too blunt an instrument. That was dealing with... But there is an important issue here, which is that the public expect us to have a fair immigration system which deals with those who are here illegally. And that is what we need to do. And he refers to the comments made by President Trump, as he has himself alluded to. I have strongly condemned those comments made by President Trump.
Theresa May finishing off there with Ian Blackford. James.
And thus concludes Theresa May's penultimate Prime Minister's questions. A week today we have a new Prime Minister. A week tomorrow. A week tomorrow
we have... Well, no, actually a week today we'll have a new Prime Minister. It'll be late on Wednesday afternoon. Theresa May will do Prime Minister's questions next week. It'll be our final Prime Minister's questions, and then she'll go to the palace to tell the Queen who she thinks her successor should be. That successor will, of course, be the person Boris Johnson, in all likelihood, pretty much nailed on, having won the contest against Jeremy Hunt, and that being announced on Tuesday.
Contest, which is, of course, decided by a constituency of which about 64,000 people don't think a Muslim should be allowed to be the British Prime, or don't think a Muslim should be the British Prime Minister. So Theresa May and Jeremy Corbyn both banged to rights, both utterly disgraceful, a plague on both their houses. And that film, The Great Hack, is not due on Netflix until the 24th of July. I had VIP access. I didn't realise that the rest of you would have to wait. Here's Sheila Fogarty.